Hello and welcome to this session. My name is Professor Julie Davies. I'm at Brunel University of London in the UK, and today's topic is going to look at academic leadership identity transitions. It's always useful to start off with definitions. What is leadership? And I think it's very important to distinguish leadership from leaders, so from individuals to the phenomenon of leadership more generally, and also very importantly to discuss followership. Because without followers, I suggest you may be a thought leader, but if nobody's following you, you look behind, there's no one there, you're probably not a leader. Keywords when we look at leadership are influence, as well as followers, and also a sense of purpose. So looking at this definition by Joseph Rost, he defined leadership as an influence relationship among leaders and followers who intend real changes that reflect their mutual purpose. You need to have an intention, a reason for having this relationship, and for making a difference, whatever changes are tangible. We all like formula. So here's a formula. Leadership is about relationships. It's about influence, real intended change. There may be emergent changes that come to as well as intended change. And that you do have a sense of being in it together. You have a shared collective sense of purpose. Often it's useful to talk about leadership compared with management. Joseph Rost has rather a negative view of management. There are very positive views. We do need managers as well as leaders. But he talks about coercion and authoritarianism. Ideally, unless you're in an absolute crisis, we need to get out of this room quickly and I just become a dictator, I just say, get out. Ideally, in most situations, you do not coerce people to follow you. They follow you because they're inspired, because they share your common sense of purpose, your intention. I'd like to argue that your identity is more than just your brand, your personality, what you wear. It's also about how you are. And in academia, maybe if you're in the public sector, it's not just your position in the hierarchy, but again, it's relational and how you see yourself. So Grun and her colleagues talked about unless public managers think of themselves as leaders, others won't follow them. So how do you, first of all, lead yourself? How do you perceive yourself, your own identity? What are your own characteristics, your behaviors, your values that make you a leader? Somebody gave you the job title maybe of a leader, and do you believe in it yourself? Because if you don't believe you're a leader, how will other people engage with you? And it's clearly not about your actions, but it's, your core, your identity. It's how you feel and how you internalize the role of being a leader. So how do others perceive you and relate to you and feel about you as well? We have a lot of challenges about identity politics. You may be Spanish, you may be an engineer, you have multiple identities in and outside work. But what is it that actually allows you to make a difference in organizations and with teams? And here's a book. You may not know this guy, but you'll certainly know his partner, Oprah Winfrey. And clearly, she has a following, she has a clear identity, and he makes a case in this book that to lead others, you must first lead yourself. So finally, to look at the keywords in the title, what exactly is academic leadership? Are you just leading academics to be good scholars, to be good educators, researchers, teachers, thought leaders in their discipline? I suspect most people who are academic leaders also have to do administration. They have to think about finances. They also have to do commercial activities, outreach, which isn't strictly in their academic discipline. So here's a recent book on higher education leadership from scholars in the US, and clearly there's been considerable backlash about EDI and other issues. So what is going on? How do you lead when there's lots of issues about identity politics, not least about your own academic identity as a leader over time, over various transitions throughout your tenure? So they argue that there are limitations to hierarchical ways of doing things, very individualistic, selfish ways of individual-centered models in higher education. It's not just about individuals, it is about teams, it is about communities, and people can be leaders in the lowest ranks in organizations. It's also very much about processes, so it's dynamic. It's not just slapping a title, a name on your door, giving you a business card with this title on it. It's about you delegating so that you don't become overloaded. It's sharing power. It's constantly work in progress. And they also argue very much for equity and inclusion, which is clearly a very live issue in many university campuses in the US. So what is your story as you build your identity? How is that changing over time in your journey when we're all living in highly contested spaces? And how are we reimagining leadership in higher education as it becomes more digital? Everybody's using ChatGPT. What does it mean necessarily when people don't come into work every day in higher education? How can you lead remotely in this environment that's very unstable, uncertain? People talk about a banny context of uncertainty, insecurity, non-linear, ambiguous behaviors when we have to be very agile. As an academic leader, you may be leading people from different methodologies, different ontologies, different ways of looking at the world. Perhaps your background is in science, you're a medic, an academic medic. You have to talk to people in drama department or people in the business school, people outside your discipline. So how do you speak multiple languages? How do you speak their language that may be very different from yours? And as I said, we've perhaps moved from this VUCA world to a banny world, which is characterized by things being brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. I wrote this book about leading a business school based on my research, and essentially I found that you interview people who want to be business school deans or who are new business school deans, and they think their job is to lead the business school. And very soon they realize that is not the key job. It's to be the mediator in a university-based business school, at least, between the university and the business school. So they're constantly juggling their identities, their identity work between business school work, their identity as a scholar. They may be a finance professor. They want to talk to their peers and boost the research profile, the scholarship of their business school, and get that at the table of the university. But they also have to have their cross-university ambassadorial hat and, deal with commercial acumen and the business side of the university. So this liminality, this hybridity, one minute you're a scholar, the next minute you're an executive. So how do you operate as an academic executive? You're not just focusing on exam scores, but you're looking at the wider issue. And that's an open access book that you can read for free. I'm also quite struck by Ranjay Gulati at Harvard, who talks about courage. So certainly you have to take risks, you have to take calculated risks to distinguish your piece of academia from others. How do you maintain competitive advantage, gain it and sustain it? And what is it about you as an individual in being brave, doing things you've never done before, saying no to people, going places, mixing with people that perhaps you feel quite fearful about? This is an interesting report by David Parkin on leadership identity, written for Advanced HE. And he concluded in asking, who do you think you are as an academic leader, that people will judge you not just on what you did, but how you did it and the quality of the relationships they experience with you. So in line with a lot of the other points that have been made, it's about being and processes and dynamic work in progress as much as doing. So you may be very task focused, but you need also to think about how you get along with people in doing those tasks. And it's not just about you doing, actually, also about how you delegate and get other people to do things with you or for you. So he concluded that if you wish to engage a highly diverse community of scholars and professionals in a university context, then in terms of leadership identity, how you are with people, the trust you inspire and the respect you show will matter every bit as much as everything or anything you achieve. And he argues that your primary goal should be enabling the community. It's more than just a PR public relations exercise. Some of the 9 C's Ranjay Gulati talks about are commitment, connection, confidence, and charisma, which we may challenge. So what are your C's? We'll look at that later. This recent edited book that we have a chapter in, the Oxford Handbook of Leadership, Followership and Identity, looks again at identity as dynamic. And you construct it and you deconstruct it, and it's a process. So leadership and followership are not just roles, but dynamic identity shared by complex identity construction and deconstruction processes that again define who leads, who follows, and how individuals navigate managerial transitions and changes in their roles. Based on this research, I've suggested 11 questions you might like to think about your own academic leadership identity. So how do you construct it? How do you build it? With whom? Who are you doing identity work with? What kind of processes are involved? Are you having a coach? Are you writing a journal? Are you chatting to confidants at work? Is your team giving you feedback? Secondly, what kinds of challenges are you having in terms of, your stable identity? You're maybe very clear on one task and others you have to invent from scratch. What kind of language are you using? Are you using positive, clean language? What kind of metaphors and symbols are you using to build up your identity? What's going on in your head? What's going on socially? What are your intentions? What are your relationships? And what are the consequences of these interacting? Thirdly, how do you perceive yourself in shaping your personal identity, your team's identity, and organizational outcomes? Fourthly, how are these changing over time? Are you reflecting? Are you taking time out to think? What's happening between you and others? Question 5. Question 6. Are you actually formally doing any development work in different contexts? Number 7, what is the context and how is that changing, you and others? Number 8, how are you dealing with maybe identity conflict, where you have multiple identities like work-life spillover, your identity as a parent, your identity as a line manager, your identity as a chair of a committee or as a member of a committee? How are you, number 9, leading between groups? How are you doing that, bringing groups together? Number 10, what about culture and subcultures? And 11, very important, about vision and communication. This is a kind of checklist for you to look at the key elements of transitions in your academic leadership identity work. This is a quotation from a famous article that looks at who will lead and who will follow and the social processes involved in leadership identity work. So Daru and Ashford talk about leadership being co-constructed. It's not just about you building your identity, but it's in relation with others, when individuals claim and grant leader and follower identities in their social interactions. So you've constantly got this claiming and granting dance. I claim to be an expert in something that I'm leading us on, and other people are giving you that allowing you to be credible in that sphere. So how do you internalize that identity work or follower work? And those identities become relationally recognized through reciprocity, through reciprocal role adoption, and collectively endorsed within the organizational context. So people grant you leadership and followership rights to be whatever it is you claim. They grant you rights to your claim. Here's a model on leadership in higher education. Parkin looked at what does it take to be an effective leader and came up with this model VIDA. So you need vision, energy, very important, engagement, direction, and alignment. So leadership is about, as far as Parkin's concerned, is about being inclusive. It's sharing the leadership with others. That's why it's called ship and not just being a leader. It's about listening, very importantly, and growing, participating, accepting diverse points of view, considering them at least, being collaborative and supportive. It's about building a story, so storytelling, so that you have a collective commitment behind this story and making connections and aligning people's efforts behind this mission. So I hope you find that a useful tool. Another framework that's useful more generally, not just in higher education, is this Identity Leadership Inventory, ILI. So it has 15 questions that you can ask yourself, divided into 4 sections. So the first of all, what is your identity prototype? And is that being one of us? Do people associate you with them? The second thing is, are you acting? Are you doing things for us as a group, as an organization or a department? Are you working on that? Are you being entrepreneurial in crafting a sense of us? And finally, are you making impact, making us matter with us? So there are 15 questions associated with those that you might like to look at. So for example, being one of us, you might ask, does the leader embody the key values, the core competencies that we as a group would like to identify with? Do you, in the second box, do things for us? So do you stand up for us when you need to? The third box is crafting a sense of us. So do you do things that build a sense of cohesion? Maybe it's chit chat, it's a social event, it's something that brings our identity together despite our differences. And then finally, do you bring us together as a group, perhaps create structures that can consolidate that identity? When we talk about identity, we might think of branding. If we look at these professors here, clearly they have their own brand, their personality. People identify with them in the public eye. So Bernardine Evaristo, a famous novelist and professor of creative writing. Mary Beard, who educates us about the classics. Nana Anokia at Brunel has a very distinctive way of presenting himself in terms of amazing designer clothes. And Brian Cox obviously has a particular kind of personality that comes across in selling physics from Manchester University, and his story about being in a band and so on. And I think this is also very important, what you wear, how you dress, how you are as a role model in terms of your identity and how that transitions over time. But I hope I've argued and convinced you that identity transitions as academic leaders is more than just how you look. We all like heuristics, so shortcuts like rules of thumb when we think of challenges. Bowman and Deal have given this 4 frames of leadership and management effectiveness. And they looked at structural issues, so what are the rules, what is the environment, the technology that supports the way you lead. They look at human resources and relationships and how you empower people. They look at symbols, meaning, metaphors, stories, hero, villains, And they also look at the political side too. So clearly, as a leader, you may have some power. It may not be money, it may be influence, it may be in decision making. And how do you use that wisely is part of your identity. I also like this model, and I think this can be usefully applied to academic leadership transitions because it looks at you as a leader over time. So Don Hambrick and Gary Fukutomi have this model of the seasons of a CEO's tenure. So as a leader, at the very beginning, you've got a mandate. For some reason, you've been bought, you've been appointed to this leadership role, and they've given you a job description. You've got a kind of paradigm of what maybe they think you should be doing. So you've probably bought into this, you want to be a head of department or a dean or whatever. But maybe you don't know a lot about the organization or the job, but you're really keen. And you get information from lots of different sources. And perhaps you don't have a lot of power to start with because people haven't got the measure of you. Well, when you jump forward to season 4 or season 5, maybe you've been doing this for a few years or you've done it lots and lots of times, you may be very, very wedded to a particular paradigm. You've decided, this is the way we're going to do things. You've got a huge amount of knowledge, and maybe you have a lot of power, but you're bored. And maybe you only talk to a few people after a while because you know who the really useful people are or the supportive people are. So there's a danger of dysfunction. You know a lot, but you're bored. And you're not terribly creative, and you're less enthusiastic. So how do you calibrate your energy as you develop more confidence, more knowledge, and you wean out the people who are really important and maybe less important to you for getting your job done, and you realize you've still got to talk to people more widely, you've still got to keep growing this growth mindset, keep educating yourself, and keep sustaining your energy and enthusiasm, reinventing yourself so you don't get to the point of dysfunction, even though you're more focused on your role as a leader, or you pass the baton on to somebody else and you do another leadership job, or you go back to the academic benches. Using the idea of the C's of academic leadership transitions and identity, how do you see your big picture? How do you maintain self-care? How do you maintain credibility when you're dealing across the university, across disciplines? How do you have these tough conversations, keep your connections, keep going to committees, keep listening, keep consulting? When you feel you may have a kind of split personality between the academic side and the more, university leadership side. In keeping with Ranjay Gulati's theme of courage and commitment, I've thrown down 25 C's of academic leadership identity that you might like to think about, and add your own C's as well. So how do you keep calm? How do you care for yourself and others? How do you keep track of your CV and make sure you're up to date and you do have another role perhaps later on? How do you champion change? How do you deal with committees? How do you keep communicating, concentrating? What kinds of conferences do you go to? Do you go to academic leadership conferences or academic conferences? How do you sustain your confidence without being overconfident? How do you deal with different cultures and subcultures? How do you remain curious? How do you make sure you're a custodian? So this may be helpful in terms of brainstorming where you are now, where you want to be, what you should keep doing, what you should stop doing, what you should do differently. Finally, I want to make reference to Alan Bryman and Simon Lilly's paper on leadership researchers and what they want from their bosses in academia. And I turned this into a quick quiz for you. So what they found was that people wanted bosses who were just straight and direct and honest and didn't obfuscate. So as an academic leader in transition, constantly in transition, are you honest? Do people trust you? Do you have integrity? Which can be difficult. You want to say things to different people in different contexts. You might want to reassure people when maybe you don't feel terribly assured yourself? Do you consult? Maybe you run out of time, you haven't got time to consult. Do you understand the context? Do you help others succeed? Are you interested genuinely in your colleagues? Do you actually take time to chat to them? Do you show your commitment? Do you make affirmations? Do you communicate the clear sense of direction, values, and expectations? Do you promote collegiality and collaboration? And do you respect other academics' autonomy and professional competences? So this is a series of questions that emerged from Bryman and Lilly's research. So to summarize academic leadership identity transitions, we argue that relationships are very important. It matters who and how you influence and what your intentions are for change and how you develop a mutual sense of purpose. You need to think about your self-perception as a leader and what it is operating in a higher education context in terms of helping a culture of equity, belonging, and inclusion, and the context of change, digital change, and this concept of BANI, brittle, anxious, non-linear, incomprehensible spaces that we're currently working in, and dealing with risk and courage. And in the example I gave of university business school deans, they're not just managing the business school, the academics, but they're also managing cash and upwards and outwards. So it's about being as well as doing. It's about developing trust and respect and primarily enabling a sense of community and ensuring that your claims to leadership or followership are granted by others through social interactions, and particularly in that VIDA model, energy, I think, is very important, and having a sense of vision. And if you would like to check yourself against the identity leadership inventory, you're very welcome to do that. And also perhaps think about public relations, how you look, how you come across, but also how you internalize leadership, and the 4 dimensions that Bullman and Deal talked about in terms of structure, human resources, symbols, but also very importantly, politics. Who's got the power and resources in the organization and how you're linking in with that. And finally, we looked at the 25 C's of academic leadership identity work and the 5 seasons, the issues of time, how you will change over time in terms of confidence, access to information, your enthusiasm and your energy, and how you can avoid dysfunction. So thank you very much, and good luck with your academic leadership identity transition work.